Hi, good morning. Welcome to the session on the call Environment and Health 2021 that corresponds to Destination 2 of Horizon Europe Cluster 1 on Health. This destination, living and working in a health-promoting environment, aims at filling the knowledge gaps in the understanding of the impacts on our health and our well-being of those environmental, occupational, and socioeconomic risk factors that have the most significant or widespread societal impacts. So I invite you to use the Slido in order to come up with questions. You can join it. You see in the slide there how you can join and how you can introduce your questions that we have a pleasure in addressing. May I remind that there is a video available in the Info Day website where you can find more information on the destination itself and also on the topics that will be funded in the first year of Horizon of this work program 2021. So now maybe we can display a slide showing the three topics that will be funded in 2021. These topics are focusing on three specific areas of environment and health science and policy: indoor and air quality and health impacts, potential health risks related to exposures to electromagnetic fields, and the health impacts of climate change. All these are significant societal challenges to be tackled by science to support relevant policymaking efforts. In total, there is a budget allocated for those topics of around 130 million euros, and all the topics are research and innovation actions. In addition to these three topics, in the first work program of Horizon Europe, also in 2021, there is also a topic dedicated to the creation of a European partnership for the assessment of risks from chemicals, abbreviated as PARC, which should establish the European Union as an internationally recognized driver of innovative chemical risk assessment for an optimal protection of human health and the environment. As this partnership has their own process of development together with member states, we do not expect questions related to this topic today. Before we start in the session on the question and answer, let me remind you something quite important as concerns Horizon Europe, and it's its increased emphasis on the expected outputs, outcomes, and the expected impacts. Under each topic, you will see the description of the expected outcomes. So it is very important to keep in mind who would be the user of the results, the outputs that you will generate with your project, because it's by ensuring that the users will use those outputs that you will be able to generate outcome and to be able to address the expected impacts, which are the benefits more in the long term that should translate into the society as a follow-up of those research and innovation actions. So it is very important that you consider these elements when preparing your proposal. Now, let me hand over to my colleague Tuomo, who is going to provide additional remarks on this destination. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen, for your introduction. And I would also like to welcome you to this session on the Destination 2. The main aim of this session is basically to answer questions that you may have on the three topics that were mentioned by Carmen a minute ago. Hopefully, if you have some questions of technical nature, these were already answered in the first session today. So we are now ready to open the floor for questions. So I hand over back to Carmen.
Thank you very much, Tuomo. So let's take the first question, which is targeting a topic on climate change and health. So the third topic. And it's asking whether including occupational health is mentioned. Is it a requirement or optional to include occupational health aspects? Tuomo?
Yes, so this was one of the questions that we already received earlier prior to this session. So the occupational health is mentioned in 2 places in the topic description. It's mentioned under the scope. It says the aim of this topic is the identification, monitoring, and quantification of direct and indirect impact on human health, including occupational settings and related risk factors correlated to climate change, especially in vulnerable population groups such as children. And in another spot, it says proposals should include all of the following activities. And one of these is the determination of societal implications of climate change on health systems, including occupational health, and development of adaptation measures. So if you read this text carefully, you can see that it is indeed described in a fashion that it should be mandatory. So we can, for example, think about situations where firefighters are exposed to extreme heat and so forth. So this would be an example of an occupational exposure. But there are many, many others, of course.
Thank you, Tuomo. So let's move to the second question, which is addressing the topic on electromagnetic fields and health, where 5G and Wi-Fi are mentioned several times, but can the focus be also on other technologies, Tuomo?
So we have in the topic description under the scope, we say establish a potentially new exposure patterns and comparison with existing patterns. For example, those generated by the use of previous generation of mobile phone technologies. It should be documented how exposures to EMF changes over time due to the introduction of new technologies, including 5G, supporting infrastructure, radio frequency band, and modulation techniques and applications. So 5G is given an example, but this can, of course, include other kinds of technologies. So it's not exclusive to 5G. Although this is, of course, an important topic, and there are a lot of reviews that have been carried out on potential health impacts related to 5G, the introduction of 5G. And the basic conclusion is that we do not have enough data to judge whether there are actually health risks.
Indeed, these are matters that interest deeply our citizens as well. So maybe let's move to the next question, which is targeting the topic on indoor air quality. And the question is asking whether there is a definition of vulnerable population groups, and in particular, are pregnant women to be considered as vulnerable population? Tuomo.
Of course, I think there is no very strict definition of vulnerable groups, but in this context of indoor air quality, we can think that even in fetus, you can be exposed to indoor air through the mother who has been exposed to a pollution, and then it can enter into the fetus. So you can have already exposure in utero. The children would be usually a vulnerable population. Of course, pregnant women, the elderly, and also those with some pre-existing conditions. For example, in the context of indoor air quality, people with, for example, say COPD. And we can also envisage some worker groups, for example, who work in factories, who can be exposed to high levels of certain pollutants. Or, for example, people who drive a metro train, for example, who are always inside a very confined area. So these people could also have very particular exposure situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuomo. So next question is addressing the second topic on potential health risk related to exposures to electromagnetic fields, and is asking whether you see the inclusion of other third countries that could bring important data on air quality and act as a pilot. And we can also ask the question to our colleague Rosana Amario, who is our expert in international cooperation. So I will pass the floor to Tuomo, but Rosana, please feel free also to comment on this question, which is in particular targeting international cooperation.
The topic of indoor air quality, it is important in the developing world because, for example, when you move into a new house, you have new materials that have been used and they emit all kind of pollutants. So there is a problem of indoor air quality. There are indoor air quality problems in schools where children are exposed to also microbial contaminants. But traditionally, this indoor air quality has been a very big problem in the developing world. For example, this is related to use of cooking that uses fire, basic fireplaces, and these people are then exposed to particulate matter and all kind of other pollutants. So we can imagine if it fits the scope of the work to be done, the inclusion of some countries like India or where this is very much still used. And we know that the disease burden related to this is very high in certain countries outside the EU. So it is possible. So I hand over to Rosanna about the participation of the third countries.
Thank you, Carmen, Tuomo. Yes, so indeed, even when the topic does not specify that the participation of third countries is a requirement, is mandatory, of course, third countries are welcome, but as Tuomo said, it depends very much on the content of the proposal. And of course, for that, there are different rules. So some countries, in particular, low and middle income countries, are automatically eligible for funding. High income countries not, but for this you will find the rules in the general annexes to Horizon Europe.
Thank you very much, Rosanna and Tuomo. Maybe we can move to the next question, which is targeting the health impacts topics, the health impacts of climate change. And the concrete question is about the involvement of Copernicus or Galileo and EGNOS. Should the involvement be made at consortium level, or this is at the use level only? This question is for Tuomo.
This is a little bit difficult to answer, but let me first remind you the context here. So we say in the topic text that international cooperation is encouraged with the specific aim to support international climate policies. And then we say, if projects use satellite-based Earth observation, positioning, navigation, and or related timing data and services, they must make use of Copernicus and or Galileo, EGNOS. Other data and services may be additionally used. So this, I think it's not our task to say whether it should be done at the consortium level or at the use level. I think it's up to the consortium to decide at which level would be the most appropriate. I think there's no strict requirement here.
Thank you, Tuomo. So let's move now to the topic on air quality, which is addressed by the next question. And the question is asking whether outdoor air quality should be collected from open databases on air quality. Do you have an answer for that, Tuomo?
I would say that it's not a requirement to use open database. I think it's up to the consortium to decide what are the sources of data that we use, and not a strict requirement to have open databases.
Thank you, Tuomo, very clear. So next question is also targeting the indoor air quality topic. And it's in concrete asking about the networking and on the collaborations between the winning proposals. Is this a requirement, or each proposal should be self-sustained? What do you?
This will be a requirement. So I will look at the text specifically. So it says at the end of the topic text that all projects funded under this topic are strongly encouraged to participate in networking and joint activities as appropriate. These networking and joint activities could, for example, involve the participation in joint workshops, the exchange of knowledge, the development and adoption of best practices, or joint communication activities. This could also involve networking and joint activities project funded under other clusters and pillars of Horizon Europe. And the proposal should also include some budget reserved for this activity. So if you are familiar with the environment and health area, we have a lot of experience from having clusters. We have a cluster on the European Human Exposome Network, a very large cluster project. We have a cluster on endocrine disruptor testing. We have which is called the Eurion cluster. We have a new 2 clusters on exposed to micro and nanoplastics, and it has an acronym of CUSP, and also on urban health. And we have seen that bringing together projects on a similar theme will really improve the visibility of a certain area of research, and they can have joint approaches to approaching policymakers. And what happens, there are different approaches, but for example, for the exposome network, it was, we put actually into the grant agreement a clause that basically made it mandatory that the project will work very close together. In the other cases, we do not have this particular clause, and we did not include it into this topic. But I think the project will notice after a while how important it is to work together, because you can have common working groups on issues that are of common interest to all the participants in the different working groups. And then you can exchange ideas between the various projects. What you can do is at the proposal stage, you can already, as was mentioned, you have to reserve a certain amount of budget for this activity, and you can identify areas where you could foresee collaboration with the other projects. And then when the grant agreements are prepared, you can actually add maybe a whole work package or maybe a task in a work package where you then describe the common activities that will be undertaken. So this will be kind of, let's say, negotiated between the project after they have been selected for funding. And as I said, we have a lot of experience with this, and I think this is an extremely useful approach to enhance a certain research area.
Thank you, Tuomo. Indeed, a lot of experience on the clustering and how great results this achieves. The next question that I see is on the health impacts of climate change topic, and it's about the mobility-related projects. Does this include this topic, mobility-related projects, for example, targeting the positive health impacts of active mobility on climate change? This question is...
I would say that it's not excluded, certainly. I think we know that climate change, we will try to get rid of the cars, for example. So we will actually promote active mobility using other means of transport. So this is clearly, and this, of course, we know that will have then positive, at least we assume, will have positive health impacts. So I think, indeed, this aspect can be part of the proposal.
Thank you. Next question is for Rosanna, as she's targeting international cooperation. It's on the topic on indoor air quality, and it's asking a very concrete questions, whether partners from Hong Kong would be eligible.
Yes, so partners from Hong Kong are eligible to participate, but they are not automatically eligible for funding. It means that the participants from Hong Kong should join consortia with their own funding. Just to remind that it is sometimes even possible to fund these participants only if the participation is considered essential. And this is something that the evaluators discuss during the evaluation. So it depends really on the role, but the general rule is that the participants from Hong Kong may participate, but are not automatically eligible for funding.
Thank you, Rosanna, very clear. So we can move to the next question, which is asking what is not targeting a specific topic. It's asking what do we mean by policy relevant case studies? Would you have any example, Tuomo, of the meaning of this?
Well, I can see that we have it under the climate change and health topic. I think the policy relevant case study is something that you carry out a study, let's say, in 3 different cities, and you design the study closely with the policymakers. So it will, whatever data will come out of the case study will be directly usable by the relevant policymakers. And in this area, people who are involved with climate policy making. Of course, it could be some relevant other policymakers that, even urban planners or whatever, who are also faced with climate change issues. So I think we encourage close cooperation with the policymakers to make sure that the data that is produced then will be actually useful and will feed directly into the policymaking.
Thank you, Tuomo. It is a clear example of what we want to achieve. And in this particular case, that would represent who the users would be of the results that would come out with this policy, studies. So use cases, sorry. The next question is about the spread of zoonotic pathogen. And he's asking whether all zoonotic diseases are equally considered or some special emphasis is given in certain types, for example, vector-borne. Tuomo, do you have the answer for this question?
We know that in this area of climate change and health, there has been quite a lot of work done actually on the vector-borne spread of vector-borne pathogens, because these are especially environmentally sensitive and sensitive to climate changes. So we have quite a lot of data on this, but I think it's also good to not focus only on the vector-borne, but also look at some other zoonotic pathogens. So we encourage a bigger view and not only focused on vector-borne, but it doesn't mean that that's excluded.
Thank you, Tuomo. So next question is about third countries, in particular poor regions. Does their participation require any specific justification, or they can participate on equal foot as any other European Union member state? This is for Rosanna. Please, Rosanna.
Thank you, Carmen. So third countries, and in particular the majority of low and middle income countries, can join consortia and can receive EU contribution. So in that sense, I mean, if we talk about contribution, yes, they are similar to member states. On the other hand, they are not exactly the same because, for example, they do not count for the minimum requirement of participants in a proposal. So if there must be minimum of 3 participants from member states and associated countries, third countries do not count on that. So let's say that all the eligibility conditions have to be taken into account, but yes, they are the same in terms of receiving EU contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanna. Next question is is about whether the slides will be available in the document library. Well, there are not really slides. What we have here is questions that are being addressed by the topic responsibles. But what I can say is that the questions that are being answering today will be added to the frequently asked questions that are in our web pages, and therefore, yes, everything which is answered today will be added to this repository of frequently asked questions. And also, this session is being recorded, so will be accessible afterwards. Let me tackle the next topic, which is about indoor air quality. And the question in concrete is, how long may be epidemiological surveys, either on general population samples or on other school children students within the proposal? So how long may those surveys be?
It's not a simple.
No, it's not very clear as it is phrased.
Also, I understand. I think, of course, we know that some of the epidemiological surveys have been going on for years and years and decades even. But if it's a smaller scale epidemiological study, I assume that you should try to carry out it during the duration of the project. Although then maybe if you have some additional funding later, you can continue the work. But of course, if you use some retroactive data from already from other studies or surveys that have been already carried out in the past that are continuing, then you can kind of jump on this train and you could get some data from these studies already, and then maybe add a small study with this new prospective data, which you could carry on for a couple of years. So that would be another possibility. But I think it really depends on the proposals, what kind of data you want to gain from these studies. But there's no rule, let's say, to say how long a study should be.
Thank you, Tuomo. Next question is targeting also the topic on indoor air quality, and it's asking what dose response studies are eligible.
I would say any dose response. There's no restriction. I think all of them are eligible.
Okay, thank you.
That are relevant to the goals of the aims of the topic, of course.
Absolutely. Next question is for Rosanna. It's on international cooperation, as it's in concrete asking whether the projects can be coordinated by third countries.
So there is this possibility. Third countries may be coordinators, although in practice this happens very rarely. Of course, coordinators have to be aware that they will get, among others, excuse me, a financial viability check. So coordinators from third countries will, let's say, receive a number of checks as they are managing the budget for the whole consortium. So it depends really on the situation, but theoretically this is possible, and it has happened, for instance, in Horizon 2020.
Thank you, Rosanna. So if we move to next question, is also targeting the indoor air quality topic, which is quite popular today. And the concrete question is it's about what could be user-friendly solutions to monitor this indoor air quality.
So I'm looking at the topic text. So we have it under the scope. We have the list of areas that need to be covered. So we have development and deployment of technologies enabling cost-effective monitoring of indoor air quality. For example, air quality sensors and user-friendly alert systems. So user-friendly, that means that the occupants, for example, of an apartment or house can very easily would be able to detect certain pollutants, for example, that could be harmful for them. So it's not something that needs a very high level of technological knowledge. So that would, at least in my opinion, be a user-friendly approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Tuomo. Next question is again on this indoor air quality topic, and is asking whether the proposal should focus on any particular pollutants.
No, I think this is up to the proposers to decide what pollutants they want to focus on. You could also envisage, for example, leaving some of the pollutants to be studied open. And then when you have the cluster with the other projects, you would come together and then together decide certain particular pollutants that you could study together, maybe to get even more bigger database on pollution, certain aspect of pollution. So, but it's really up to the proposals to decide.
Thank you, Tuomo. So I don't see any other questions coming up for the time being. We have still some time. Maybe I can just reiterate the importance of considering the achievement of impact. And therefore, as we said at the beginning, that please consider who would be the users of whatever result will come out from the project. I think this is very important in order to assure that that these projects will translate it into the outcomes that will ultimately lead to the expected impacts. So I don't see any other question. Okay, now the question, I think it's entering. If we can, I'm going to read it. It's about the indoor air quality topic, and it's asking, I understand that conducting those response studies on organoids or cell lines would be sufficient. Then there is no need to conduct on humans. Is this correct, Tuomo? Is this interpretation correct?
I will have a look at the text again, just a second.
Sure.
Well, we do have one point on the list that says identification of body burdens resulting from multi-pollutant, real-life scenario, indoor exposures, and associated health effects, with specific focus on vulnerable population groups and sensitive life stages. So to me, this clearly indicates that you need to include some human studies also. It's not enough to work on in vitro systems.
Thank you, Tuomo. We can move to this following question, which is also targeting indoor air quality, and is asking, what are the expected ways to improve indoor air quality?
Well, I think I will leave this to the expert. Of course, we know that you can intervene at different levels, for example, try to control the emissions, etc. But I think this is up to the applicants to decide.
Thank you, Tuomo. Next question is for Rosanna on international cooperation and in particular targeting partners from Switzerland. How can they be involved since there is no official agreement from the Commission so far?
Yes, thank you, Carmen, for this question. Indeed, the situation of Switzerland for the time being is a bit, let's say, special because with the announcement of the termination of the negotiation of the institutional framework agreement that took place on the 26th of May, now the European Union will need to carefully analyze the impact of such announcements. So, in practice, the association agreement for the moment is not ongoing. And it means that if there are Swiss participants at the situation of today, this should be considered as third countries. So high-income countries, which means that they do not receive EU contribution. So Swiss participants may participate in projects, but as third countries with their own contribution. So this is the situation that we have today, that of course may evolve, we don't know, but if we have to answer today, this is the situation. So Switzerland, for the moment, is a third country, high-income third country.
Thank you, Rosanna. I see a next question arrive on whether it is mandatory or optional to plan participation of the Joint Research Center in the project for the topic where the Joint Research Center participation is eligible. And I will let Tuomo answer with more details, but it's not mandatory. This would depend on the proposal itself, depending on the scope of the proposal, and in any case, this participation would be concretized after the evaluation. But I will let Tuomo provide more details on the specific topic that was indicating that the GRC participation would be eligible.
So we have this in the indoor air quality topic. We say that proposals should ensure that chemical monitoring data are shared by the IPChem. This is the database that is maintained by JRC through involvement with the Commission's Joint Research Center. So any exposure data that will be gathered through the projects on indoor air quality should go to this database. And it has one module that is specifically focused on indoor air pollutants. So I think this is certainly a way to make sure that the data that will be gathered by the projects will be made available to the relevant policymakers and also other stakeholders. And if you want to know more about the JRC involvement, there's actually, if you go to the COL website, there are so-called general annexes, and there is actually a whole chapter on the involvement of JRC in proposals. So you should go there and read this chapter. It's not a long chapter. And I think you will find out exactly what is the requirement and what are the possibilities. And I think if you were in the introductory session this morning, I think there was also one slide that was shown about JRC involvement.
Thank you, Tuomo. There are indeed also frequently asked questions on the participation of the Joint Research Center that will be added to the website. I don't see any further question, and we have only 5 minutes from the end. So I think that maybe it's time to close the session. Let me thank you for your active participation and involvement and all the questions. Let me remind that this session is recorded, so you can listen to it again if you didn't arrive at time, or if you lose some of the parts, you can always listen it back. And also that the questions will be added to the frequently asked questions in our website. Please stay connected. In 5 minutes, in a few minutes, a new session will start with destination 3. For that, you need to change the Zoom, so you need to enter into another different session. Let me also thank you, Rosanna, Tuomo, and Sophie, for their contribution to this session, and see you later in the context of the other destinations. Thank you very much. In 15 minutes.